Hello guys, and welcome back to our channel. I welcome you to another video of a sister who was talking about the Anglo-Saxons. Now in this video, we take a critical examination of the distorted narrative surrounding the Anglo-Saxons and their connection to America. Today we're going to challenge the false narrative and false history that has been imposed upon us and uncover the truth. Now in this video, sister responds to a comment which has sparked a necessary conversation about the origins of the Anglo-Saxons and their relationship to the indigenous peoples of America. She points out that the Anglo-Saxons are not from America, but rather migrated from Europe, dispersing across the globe. And this raises fundamental questions about the legitimacy of the history that has been presented to us. How can immigrants who arrived in America via Ellis Island claim to provide an accurate account of the indigenous people's history? The answer is very clear. They cannot. And this just tells us that this history was vice versa. It was the other way around. So with that said, let's take a look at her video as she explains more on this. I'll be right back.
Wilbur, you were not paying attention in class because I have never asserted in any of my videos that the Anglo-Saxons are the original Indians. Now, this is coming from your own head, all right? And I think it's because you assume that the Anglo-Saxons are actually from America, which they're not. First and foremost, I will prove that the Anglo-Saxons are not from America. And secondly, I will also show the reason why they're not Indians, indigenous, or the actual people who were here in America first. Take a look at this. They migrated over to America from different parts of Europe. They actually come from the Caucasus Mountains, okay? And the Asians from the Denisova Mountains. They cohabitated together in some of those caves, and they came out. And then they went down to Europe, and from Europe, they dispersed all over America and all over the world for that matter. But this is, as you can see, it says from Hamburg to America line. And you see what the people look like who are getting on that ship. I first want you to see this, that I copied this photo online that says immigrants arriving at Ellis Island. Now, history that has been given to us by them is a lie. You know, first of all, how can immigrants coming to America give Americans, the indigenous people who look like me, our history? It can't be done. As you can see, all of it is a lie. They're the ones that came through Ellis Island, but they claim that my people came over from Africa to America and we came through Ellis Island. That's their false version of history. But you see that you clearly see it's them. And if you take a look at this book right here, called White Cargo, you will clearly see, it gives you the entire story. It even talks about how they went through the slave castles over there in modern day Africa. Yes, this book right here talks about that. They're the people who were enslaved, not the so-called African Americans. This in America is the ancient land. This is where all the ancient empires were at, okay? And people were actually from here via those same ships that brought the Anglo-Saxons over here, and they were dispersed throughout Europe and also dumped into Africa. Okay, it was completely told in reverse. I have plenty of videos talking about that.
This is Ellis Island. It's been shut down for 14 years. But for 51 years before that, it was called the Golden Door by the 16 million immigrants who landed here. President Kennedy said, we are a nation of immigrants, and we are. A few of us, to be sure, have ancestors away from the shore when landings were made at Jamestown or Plymouth Rock. Some of us are descended from those who were brought here unwillingly.
Did you hear what he said? He said some of them were brought here willingly and others were brought here to America against their will.
Some of us are descended from those who were brought here unwillingly. But for the rest of us, we are here because we have ancestors who migrated or because we migrated ourselves.
In the decade between 1900 and 1910, the wave of immigrants reaches tidal proportions. More than 8 million leave the old world, fleeing the age-old specters of hunger and persecution, determined to carve a better existence. For the vast majority, crowded like cattle into steerage class, the price of opportunity is $12. Soon, cholera, dysentery, yellow fever, and smallpox will be their companions. They are leaving behind the sorrows of Ptolemais, Saratov, Campobasso, Sescalipa, Poznan. Cautious optimism explodes into joy. At last, America, the land of promise. Ellis Island will be their first taste of the promised land. For many, their last.
Did you catch what he said about the promised land? He didn't say anything about Africa being the promised land. He clearly stated that America is the promised land. This is the land that was given to the Hebrews, the land of their inheritance, the land of their promise, which is the old land of Canaan, which also proves that so-called ancient Africa is in America, not modern day Africa. And this is the DNA of the people in America. People in modern day Egypt, they do not have an ounce of Egyptian DNA. This proves that some of them were indentured servants. They thought they were going to be enslaved for a short amount of time to pay for their way to America, but they actually ended up in slavery, and until the others were purchased out of slavery, or they purchased themselves out of slavery and some of their loved ones. History was told in reverse. They're genetically weaker. So there is just no way possible for anybody who lacks melanin in their skin to be the indigenous people anywhere on this earth. It's not possible. They can't even maintain their numbers on their own. They are a genetic mutation, an experiment that went wrong. They need people who look like me to survive, okay? So without us mating with them, they are off, okay? So those of you who have children with them and those of you who might be mixed, okay, you're surviving because you have the DNA of someone who looks like me in you. And I promise you, this is one of the reasons why interracial marriage was outlawed. And then all of a sudden, it's just this major push for interracial marriage. It's to keep them alive because their numbers are dwindling. And this is what they fearing out forever. So it's people with melanin in their skin when they mate with them that keep them alive. So no, people like that cannot be the indigenous or the aborigines of any place on this earth. Back to my final point, that the so-called Native Americans, this is the reason why they're not even the indigenous people, because they have far less genetic diversity than even the Europeans have. Okay, so they are an even more breed than the Anglo-Saxons are. Yes. So your comment is utterly ridiculous.
There is a special, do you want to explain the special about melanin and how it protects the cell, the DNA inside the nucleus? That's very important. It's far more likely that that melanin will be coating the nucleus, the cell wall of the nucleus of the DNA. Now the point about that is that ultraviolet light, which is often used to splice DNA, is blocked by that melanin. It absorbs it. It doesn't allow it in to interfere with the DNA. And it could well be, and this is Nigel's thesis, that this was a blocker for them when they were trying to genetically alter the species. And therefore, when maybe just out of random mutation, something like an albino came along, they discovered, wow, we can get straight in. Right. And it may well be that the paler skinned nation, people on the earth, maybe have that pale skin because of this genetic experimentation to make things easier for them to work on human DNA. There's no real explanation or justification for the need for pale skin at all.
Yeah, because I think if
dark skin is always an advantage in every circumstance.
Right. I hope you paid attention in class this time. You're dismissed.
Now, Ellis Island was a processing center for immigrants to the United States, including many who were not Anglo-Saxon. From 1892 to 1954, over 15 million immigrants passed through Ellis Island. Most came by sea through the Port of New York, but other ports of entry included Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, San Francisco, and New Orleans. The Ellis Island Immigration Station, located in New York Harbor, opened in 1892 and closed in 1954. During peak years from the 1890s until the 1920s, the station processed an estimated 12 million immigrants. Roughly 75% of all immigrants arriving in America during this period passed through Ellis Island. The station was run by the Federal Immigration Service and represented a new era of federal control over immigration. Officials at Ellis Island were tasked with regulating the flow of immigration by enforcing a growing body of federal laws that barred various categories of undesirable immigrants. As the number of immigrants coming to America increased, so did the size of the inspection facility. In 1907, Ellis Island processed more than 1 million immigrants. The quota laws of the 1920s slowed immigration considerably, and the rise of the visa system meant that Ellis Island no longer served as the primary immigrant inspection facility. For the next 3 decades, Ellis Island mostly served as a detention center for those ordered deported from the country. After Ellis Island closed in 1954, the facility fell into disrepair during a period of low immigration and a national emphasis on assimilation. The immigrant inspection station was forgotten by most Americans. With a revival of interest in ethnicity in the 1970s, Ellis Island attracted more attention, especially from the descendants of immigrants who entered the country through its doors. In the 1980s, large-scale fundraising for the restoration of the neighboring Statue of Liberty led to a similar effort to restore part of Ellis Island. In 1990, the main building was reopened to the public as an immigration museum under the National Park Service. Ellis Island has evolved into an iconic national monument with deep meaning for the descendants of the immigrants who arrived there, as well as a contested symbol to other Americans grappling with realities of contemporary immigration. Now, according to research, the first people to call themselves English were predominantly descended from Northern Europeans. A new study reveals over 400 years of mass migration from the northern Netherlands and Germany provide the genetic basis of many English residents today. Now, the people after which England is named made up more than 3/4 of the nation's genetic ancestry during the early Middle Ages. Researchers found that the arrival of Europeans between 400 and 800 CE, including the Angles from which the word England is derived, accounted for 76% of the genetics of the British population at this time. Now, while subsequent arrivals had diluted this proportion in the genetics of modern-day Britons, it still represents around half of the ancestry of people in eastern England today. This decreases in the southwest of England, Wales, and Scotland, where the contribution from the ancient Celtic populations remains high. Now, Professor Ian Barnes, a merit researcher at the museum who co-authored the paper, says it's great that we've been able to contribute to this extensive study of the early English, as there is almost no ancient DNA work on the Anglo-Saxon period. The results are fascinating and flag up how significant the change in the population was at this time. Now, the early years of the 400s were one of turmoil in Western Europe, as the Roman Empire lurched from crisis to crisis. While there is no specific date for the end of the Roman rule in Britain, it was over by at least 410 CE. At this time, the genetic makeup of England was primarily comprised of Celtic ancestry, with significant contributions from continental Europeans as a result of the Romans. The genetics of Wales and Scotland, meanwhile, remained more distinctly Celtic. Over the next few hundred years, the arrival of Europeans contributed to the formation of Anglo-Saxon culture in England, which would dominate until the arrival of the Normans in 166. However, whether this migration was peaceful or ensured by force has been debated for many years. Now, a lack of widespread archaeological evidence had been used by historians to suggest that England was ruled by a small but elite group of Anglo-Saxons, which led to the adoption of their culture over time. However, this theory did not explain why in some areas these individuals can be found buried side by side with Britons. Now, the sisters' assertion that the Anglo-Saxons are not from America but rather migrated from Europe is a crucial distinction that sheds light on the complex and often distorted narrative of American history. As the sister noted, the Anglo-Saxons' arrival in America was a result of their migration from Europe, specifically from present-day Germany, England, and other parts of Northern Europe. And this migration, which occurred in various waves, had a profound impact on the indigenous populations of America, leading to displacement, violence, and the erasure of their cultures. Now, the sisters' reference to Ellis Island is also significant. Ellis Island, which operated as an immigration inspection station from 1892 to 1954, was a key entry point for millions of immigrants arriving in the United States. However, as the sister has already pointed out, the narrative surrounding Ellis Island often perpetuates the myth that all immigrants, including those of African descent, arrived in America through this portal. And this narrative erases the traumatic history of the transatlantic slave trade and the forced immigration of enslaved Africans to the Americas. Now, the sister's emphasis on the importance of reclaiming indigenous history and culture is very important. For too long, the dominant narrative of American history has been shaped by the perspectives of European colonizers, with the experiences and contributions of indigenous people and people of color marginalized or erased. By centering the voices and stories of indigenous people, we can know the truth. We have finally come to the end of the video, but what do you, our viewers, have to say? Share your thoughts in the comment section, and see you in our next video as we bring you another interesting video.